Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our coverage of the 2021 Rolex Sydney Hobart Yacht Race, the 76th running of this Blue Water Classic. And after a year's absence, there might be a few yachtsmen at the moment wishing it had been cancelled for another year. But they've got on top of COVID, but the conditions have really made it a very tough first night's racing at sea. It's a race of attrition. It's been a gear breaker and a bone breaker. Thankfully, though, only one yachtsman so far has been reported as being injured at sea, but that has put his yacht out of the race. I'm Peter Gee, and I'll be your co-host for our coverage over the next week. And joining me in commentary is a man who was at the start yesterday, Peter Shipway, and the race started as it has continued.
Yes, good afternoon, Peter. Yes, it's been quite dramatic, hasn't it? I mean, we saw a terrific start on the harbour. You know, the boats flying down under spinnakers, and then they got outside Sydney Heads, and then carnage began. And for the first 24 hours, we've seen an incredible amount of boats retire, and which is obviously disappointing for them, disappointing for their fans and their families, but it's quite a high number.
Can we put that down to not having raced last year and the excitement of, well, all the uncertainty pre-race, and then we finally get to the start line? Let's get to Hobart as quickly as we can.
Well, I think you could say that, and also the last few years when the race has been run, they've been pretty easy Hobart races. So I'm not saying people have been slack or whatever, but I think there's probably been boats that are probably not race hardened and crews that are not race hardened. And it certainly showed last evening when we had all these retirements. Although the lead-up races, having said that, in Sydney have been quite rugged, some tough conditions. But outside the Heads yesterday, the weather modelling had the boats going well to seaward to pick up favourable current. So that means the current's running south and the breeze is running the other way. So it really would make for some nasty seas. And it might sound funny, but you want to get to Hobart as quick as you can, but you probably have to slow your boat down in those bad seas, especially the big boats. They're jumping off waves, they're firing off waves, and they can really do some serious damage to hull, rig, their sails and crew, and we've seen that already. So probably last night it was a case of getting through the night and making sure the boat was hunkered down nicely, and you probably go slower than you would normally do. And the boats that did that have come out the next day and are in good shape.
Just the raw numbers as we go to air. 88 yachts started yesterday on Sydney Harbour on 4 start lines. As we talk to you now, 29 boats have had to retire, so just 59 still at sea. So that attrition rate is very high. It should slacken off now as the winds drop. And you know, once you're a day in, anybody who's thinking, well, this is pretty rough, we could jury rig something and keep going, but we might as well head back to Sydney because we're no chance now to win our division or whatever. But after the first 24 hours, you think, well, we'll battle south anyway.
Yes, I think that's right. And looking at the weather, the hard part was last night. The harder part is now to the finish because the weather's going to be so tricky. I think it's not going to be hard weather, but it's going to be very tricky weather to negotiate a few high-pressure systems and to get down the Tasmanian coast. And, of course, Storm Bay and the river always turns it on for someone to make it as hard as possible to win this race.
So tactics is going to win the race.
Absolutely, from here on in.
What about line honours? The 100-foot maxis, the 3 of them still up there at the front. Yesterday, Scallywag out of the Heads first, and then they had gear damage straight away.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think at the moment, Blackjack's looking pretty solid. She is a boat that probably goes better in lighter air than heavy air, and we saw that again outside the Heads yesterday when Law Connect really stepped out from the rest of from Blackjack and Scallywag. So as the breeze gets lighter now as they're getting into Bass Strait, I think it's probably favouring Blackjack to be first to finish.
They've gone inshore a little bit.
They're a little bit to the west of the other two, yeah. But it's very tricky. Looking at the weather, no one can really get a handle on it, so it'll be up to the navigators to really interpret the weather patterns that they're getting and so you can get down the Tassie coast the best.
Scallywag, you know, that looked like a race-ending mishap to me yesterday, just out of the Heads. Yet they've kept going, and they just had a storm jib up there for a while.
Yeah, they did for a long while.
And they're still in contact, so they must think, well, you know, we've ridden out the worst of it, and that you couldn't write them off.
No, I think probably the storm jib towards going into last night was probably the right sail. So they ended up with the right sail, but not for a long while. They've obviously repaired the damage. It was where the front jib attached to the deck of the boat. I think they had problems there, and they've obviously done a terrific job to get that back.
That looked pretty dangerous up there. I wouldn't want to be a bowman there yesterday.
Yeah. But I think the other thing is, though, Peter, that they've got their main forestay, so they can put big headsails up. So when wind gets lighter, there's no disadvantage to them at all.
And what about Law Connect? They've put this new bowsprit on to make it go better in light winds, and that maybe the weather will come to their aid now.
It could. They're a fair way back at the moment. They'll need not luck, but they'll need to really manage their weather probably better than Blackjack to make an impression. They're 30 odd miles astern, which is a fair way, but fall into a couple of holes down the Tassie coast, which a lot of boats have done, myself included. It doesn't take long to catch up 30 miles.
Stefan Racing, the 80-footer, has kept them, well, not quite in sight, but they're in Bass Strait as well. I think, the first 4 on the water are into Bass Strait.
Yeah, she's done a good job. She's an 80-footer, so she's giving away 20 feet in length. She's
likes it upwind, though.
Yeah, and a good crew. Grant Warrington has previously won the race on line honours before, and Carl Crawford in the navigator's seat. He's a 3-time handicap winner. They know their way south, so they've been solid. And Whisper also, David Griffith's boat, who's 62-footer. They're just about to enter Bass Strait, and they look good on handicap at the moment as well.
Well, you couldn't really say that it's inexperience that has led to this high withdrawal rate so far. We've lost a lot of experienced racers overnight, none more so than Lindsay May going in a record 48 Sydney Hobart in Kealoha 2, which had to retire not too far back, and No Limit, which crewman broke his humerus on that boat overnight. Tony Ellis was racing his 53rd Sydney Hobart. So the two men with more experience than any others, I guess they know the vagaries of this particular Blue Water Classic.
Yeah, well, that's right, Pete. Unfortunately, their celebrations will end back in Sydney, not in Hobart. But it's disappointing to retire from a Hobart race, or from any race, really, because especially this year, where there's been really a 2-year build-up to this year's Rolex race, and the time, the preparation, the money and the effort that goes into getting a boat ready, and then of course 24 hours later you're sitting back in the dock in the CYC. It's very disappointing. Noel
Cornish, the Commodore of the Cruising Yacht Club of Australia, is in Hobart, and he's talking to the press about the first 24 hours of the Rolex Sydney Hobart.
Yeah, so been very tough conditions this year, more like what I'd call the traditional Hobart. Every now and again in the Hobart run, you get a race like this. Interestingly, the southerly's been at up to 30 knots, which is not a strong one. None of us have been out there in lots stronger than 30 knots in this sort of race. But current running south, 3 or 4 knots against this southerly has caused very, very difficult seaway. And that's what's resulted in these sort of retirement rates we're seeing. So we've got a lot of torn mainsails mainly, and some rigging damage that's predominantly taken these boats out. But it will be known as a good Hobart. So over the recent years, people have had a pretty easy Hobart to do, and the people that have done this Rolex Sydney Hobart yacht race this year could truly say they've done a Sydney to Hobart yacht race.
Noel Cornish bringing us up to date there. What about handicap and the two-handed, which is got a lot of interest to it? There's been retirements there as well, Peter. Overall, how's the race looking?
Well, I think for the handicap honours, it's probably down to Ichiban, the defending champion. She's going to try and win the race for the 3rd time, only the third boat that would ever do that, behind Love and War and Freya. She's gone well to sea last night, but she's really picking up a good course across Bass Strait. And speaking of Love and War, she's highly fancied as well, well placed. A little boat called Whitebait Azuro, one of the smallest rating boats in the fleet. If the forecast is as it says, following northerly winds over the next 2 or 3 days across Bass Strait and down the east coast, she'll give it a big shake as well. In the two-handers, I think Disco Trooper, a little boat, little 9.9 metre boat. She's highly placed, and but they've done a terrific job, all those two-handers, to get through last night. I know there's been a couple of retirements, but boy, on a fully crewed boat it's hard work. On a two-handed boat, those guys and girls, because Wendy Tuck's out there racing in a two-handed boat, they've done a fantastic job.
And Sidewinder, there's going to be a lot
Yeah.
of local interest in Hobart there with that one.
Robbie Goff, yeah. Well, I think they're leading the two-handers on the water for the line honours, and they're performing exceptionally well, Sidewinder. So still a lot of miles to go. You know, some of them have still got 500 miles to go, so there's a lot to play for.
Peter, we're going to be doing a lot of talking over the next week or so. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back with our next update a little bit later on from the village here on Constitution Dock.